My name is Riley Porter. I am 30 years old. Last month, I threw a party at a lakeside venue outside Charlotte, North Carolina for the biggest moment of my 8-year-old son's life. 50 people showed up to celebrate the day Eli won a full scholarship to a summer tech academy that costs more than I make in 6 months. Everything was perfect until it was not. We were clapping, cameras flashing, Eli standing on a low wooden stage in a blazer 2 sizes too big, smiling wider than I had ever seen him before. Then, my sister-in-law stood up from her table in a sleek emerald dress, phone in one hand, and walked straight to the stage. Before anyone could stop her, she took the microphone right out of Eli's hands and said loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "Oh, come on. Let us not pretend this is not just a pity scholarship for a poor little boy whose dad ran off. It makes for such a great story, does it not?" The room went silent. Eli's face drained of all color, and his eyes found mine across the crowd, searching for something I couldn't give him in that moment. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. 50 pairs of eyes bounced between us, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I would make a scene or swallow it like I always did. That's when the glass doors at the back of the hall slid open. A man in a navy suit stepped inside, flanked by another man carrying a laptop bag and a woman in a blazer holding a legal folder. He stopped in the center aisle, took in the scene, the shaking child, the smirking influencer, the frozen guests, and said in a voice the sound system picked up perfectly, "Who just decided to turn my son into content?" Phones lifted. Somewhere near the stage, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for an entire year. This was the moment I had been planning since the night I realized my sister-in-law's chronic illness only flared up when my son did something worth celebrating. Before I tell you how we got here and why Vanessa's supposed chronic illness GoFundMe doesn't exist anymore, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what's the worst thing a relative has said about your kid in public. I read every single one. Trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for this. Let me take you back 9 years when everything started falling apart. I was 21, working the register at a department store in a Charlotte mall, trying to figure out how to be an adult. That's when I found out I was pregnant. The father was a guy I'd been dating for 7 months, a musician named Jordan who played dive bars on weekends and talked about moving to Nashville one day. When I told him, sitting in his car outside my apartment, he looked me dead in the eyes and said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that this wasn't part of the plan, that maybe I should think about my options. 4 months into the pregnancy, he changed his number, deleted all his social media, and vanished like smoke. I haven't heard from him since. Not a call, not a text, not a single dollar, until the night of that party. I went to my parents' house to break the news on a Sunday afternoon when I knew my older brother Mason and his wife Vanessa would be there for dinner. The second I said the words, "I'm keeping the baby," the temperature in that dining room dropped 20 degrees. My father, Charles, a man who owned 2 car dealerships and a small commercial property management business, made it very clear that night that if I had this child out of wedlock, I would be cut off completely. No more help with my community college tuition, no safety net, no family support. Of any kind. My mother, Ellen, just sat there crying into her cloth napkin while Vanessa, who had only been part of the family for a year, smirked behind her wine glass like she'd just won something. Mason pulled me aside in the hallway and told me straight up that I was ruining the family reputation and embarrassing him in front of his wife's friends. Vanessa didn't even bother whispering. She leaned back in her chair at that polished oak table and said if I embarrassed the Clark name like this, she would make sure nobody ever forgot what kind of girl I was. 2 weeks later, my parents changed the locks on their house. I moved into a cramped townhouse with a coworker who felt sorry for me, and I started working the night shift at a regional distribution center because the pay was better and I could take online classes during the day. Eli came into the world 7 months later. tiny and screaming and perfect. And I made a promise over his hospital bassett that I would protect him from everyone who tried to make him feel small. The first birthday party I threw for him when he turned 1 was nothing fancy, just a dozen people crammed into my living room with a grocery store cake and some balloons. Vanessa showed up uninvited with Mason trailing behind her, walked straight to the cake table with her phone out, and started telling everyone in earshot how tragic it was that my son would grow up without a father because his mother couldn't keep her life together. People shifted awkwardly in their folding chairs and made excuses to leave early. I cleaned up alone after everyone was gone, Eli asleep on the couch in his little party hat. When Eli turned 3, I saved up for months to rent a fenced backyard with a bounce house from a neighbor who ran a small party business. I invited the whole family, hoping maybe things had cooled off. Maybe my parents would want to see their grandson blow out candles this time. Vanessa spent the entire afternoon pulling aunts and cousins aside, whispering just loud enough for me to overhear that I was probably on welfare and only throwing the party to make myself look good, to prove something to people who didn't care. Half the guests made excuses and left before we even cut the cake. My mother texted me the next morning saying it would be better if I stopped trying to force family gatherings, that it made everyone uncomfortable. I didn't invite them again for a long time after that. Those early years taught me real fast that Vanessa didn't just dislike me, she needed me to fail so she could be the one everyone admired. By the time Eli turned 4, something shifted in Vanessa's tactics. She stopped showing up to mock me directly and started showing up to steal the spotlight entirely. At a family barbecue that summer, right after Eli's kindergarten graduation, Vanessa announced for the first time that she'd been diagnosed with a mysterious autoimmune disease that doctors were still trying to identify. She stood in the middle of my brother's backyard with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a tissue, talking in this soft, broken voice about how empty and scared she felt. My mother and all the aunts gathered around her like she was made of glass. Nobody asked about Eli's graduation or the little certificate he'd been so excited to show everyone. The rest of that afternoon became about how brave Vanessa was for even getting out of bed that morning, how strong she was for carrying this pain in silence. Over the next few years, I started noticing a pattern that made my stomach twist every time it seemed. Whenever something good happened for Eli, getting picked for the robotics club, winning a spelling bee, making honor roll, Vanessa would post a tearful selfie within hours. Hospital gown, IV pole in the background, captions about fighting through another flare-up and trusting God's timing. Every single time I tried to talk about Eli's achievements at family dinners, someone would redirect the conversation to Vanessa's latest test results, or her new specialist, or how we all needed to keep her in our prayers. Ellen, my mother, started gushing about how Vanessa was such an inspiration, how she handled her suffering with such grace. Vanessa became the family saint, the tragic heroine everyone rallied around, while Eli and I faded into the background like we were barely worth acknowledging. I would sit at those dinners, watching my son pick at his food and stay quiet, and I would feel this cold, helpless anger building in my chest that I didn't know what to do with yet. Then, Vanessa launched a GoFundMe campaign. The page was polished, professional, full of heavily edited photos of her looking pale and exhausted in what I now know were staged hospital visits. She wrote long, emotional captions about needing experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, about medical bills piling up, about the loneliness of fighting a battle most people couldn't see. Local businesses donated, church members donated, even some of my coworkers donated after seeing her posts shared on social media. Her follower count exploded overnight. At Eli's first robotics showcase, when his team was about to present their project on stage, Vanessa fainted in the middle of the auditorium. Paramedics were called, the whole event stopped, and by the time everything settled down, the showcase had moved on to the next team. Later that week, I overheard Vanessa at a brunch with one of her influencer friends laughing about how being sick online paid better than a real job if you sold it right. I stood frozen behind a planter in the restaurant courtyard with my phone in my hand, not sure if I had really just heard what I thought I heard. I tried raising concerns with my mother and Mason. I asked why Vanessa's medical emergencies always seemed to happen right when Eli had something important going on, why the GoFundMe money was going towards home renovations and designer handbags instead of hospital bills. Ellen looked at me like I had just spit on the communion table and told me I was jealous, that I couldn't stand to see someone else getting attention for once. Mason told me I was being paranoid and cruel, that his wife was suffering and I was making it about myself like always. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through Vanessa's fundraiser page and her Instagram posts. I opened a blank spreadsheet and started logging dates. Every single emergency, every hospital selfie, every tearful video lined up perfectly with something good happening in Eli's life. Science fair win, flare up. Robotics competition, flare up. School assembly honoring students, sudden unbearable pain. The pattern was so clear, I could not believe I had not seen it sooner. 2 years ago, everything changed for me. Eli's robotics team won a regional competition, and the school organized a small assembly to honor them with medals and certificates. I sat in the front row of the gymnasium with my phone ready to record, so proud I thought my chest would burst. Right as they called Eli's name, Vanessa stood up 3 rows behind me, clutching her stomach, weeping about how seeing other people's children thrive broke her heart because her own arms would always be empty. Teachers and parents rushed to comfort her. The principal paused the ceremony to make sure she was okay. By the time everyone refocused, they had already moved on to the next award, and Eli's moment was gone. That night, I tucked him into bed, and he asked me, voice so small I almost did not hear it, if he was the reason Aunt Vanessa kept getting sick. He asked if maybe she would stop hurting if he stopped winning things. I sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, listening to him breathe, and something inside of me that had been bending for 9 years finally snapped clean in half. I was not going to let her do this to him anymore. I was not going to let my son grow up thinking his achievements caused someone else pain. The next morning, I started looking for a private investigator. I found Noah Barnes through a coworker whose sister had used him in a messy divorce. He was a former Charlotte police detective who ran a small firm out of an office park near the airport, the kind of place with peeling linoleum and metal file cabinets. I met him on a Saturday afternoon, slid a folder full of printed screenshots and my handwritten spreadsheet across his desk, and told him I thought my sister-in-law was faking a chronic illness for money and attention. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He just opened the folder, read for 10 minutes straight, and then looked up and said, "Let me pull some records." Over the next year, Noah did what I couldn't do alone. He pulled clinic and hospital intake logs that showed Vanessa checking in for abdominal pain and checking out 30 minutes later with no acute findings, over and over, at least 15 times in 2 years. He got parking garage footage showing her arriving alone, calm, walking into the ER entrance, and leaving an hour later with shopping bags. He cross-referenced the dates on her GoFundMe updates with her credit card statements, which someone on his team got through a legal subpoena I didn't ask too many questions about, and found charges for resort stays, luxury boutiques, and cosmetic dermatology appointments on the exact days she claimed to be bedridden. The evidence that hurt the most was an audio recording. I'd started keeping my phone on record during family events, just in case, and one afternoon I caught Vanessa on a voice message she accidentally sent to me instead of her friend. In it, she laughed about Eli being her built-in charity prop, about how people love a sad kid with a sick aunt, how it's just good marketing. When Noah played that clip back to me in his office, I had to leave the room and sit in my car for 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again. Then Noah found Jordan. It took him 4 months of database searches and old social media archives, but he tracked him down to Raleigh, where he was working as a cybersecurity consultant for a mid-sized firm. Noah reached out carefully, vetted him, made sure he wasn't dangerous or unstable, and then asked him if he would be willing to meet with me. Jordan said yes. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Charlotte and Raleigh on a cold Saturday morning in March. Jordan looked different, older, put together in a way he never was when we were young. He wore a button-down shirt and glasses, and when he saw me walk in, he stood up like he didn't know whether to hug me or shake my hand. We sat down across from each other in a corner booth, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. Then he told me he had thought about me and the baby, about us, almost every day for 9 years, and that he was so ashamed of what he did that he convinced himself we were better off without him. I didn't let him off easy. I told him he didn't get a gold star for finally feeling guilty, that showing up now didn't erase the years Eli spent asking why he didn't have a dad like the other kids. But then Noah showed him the file. All of it. The fake hospital visits, the fundraiser money spent on vacations, the recordings, the pattern of Vanessa tearing Eli down every time he succeeded. Jordan went pale. He asked to see a picture of Eli, and when I showed him one on my phone, his hands shook. He said if I would let him, he wanted to help, not to make himself feel better, but because no kid should grow up thinking they were a problem. I didn't trust him yet, but I trusted Noah's judgment, and Noah said Jordan checked out. So I said yes. We spent the next 3 months planning. Eli entered a citywide STEM competition through his school, and when he won first place, the sponsor company organized a scholarship banquet at a lakeside event venue for all the winners and their families. I made sure to invite everyone: my parents, Mason and Vanessa, teachers, school administrators, local press, and the tech company executives funding the program. Noah prepared a clean, undeniable presentation: a pre-recorded video, financial documents, medical records, and the audio clip, all ready to go on a laptop. Jordan hired 2 attorneys and rehearsed exactly what he would say. We knew Vanessa wouldn't be able to resist stealing Eli's moment. We were counting on it. The night of the banquet, I watched Eli practice his speech one more time in our bathroom mirror, his little tie crooked, his voice shaking with excitement. I knelt down, fixed his tie, and told him no matter what happened tonight, I was proud of him. He smiled at me, trust in his eyes, and I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle over me like a lead blanket. But I also felt something else, something sharp and clear. I was done protecting people who hurt my child. I wasn't going to let my son grow up thinking his achievements caused someone else pain. The banquet hall was beautiful. String lights reflecting off the lake outside, white tablecloths, a small stage with a microphone and a projector screen. Guests filled the round tables, chatting and laughing, while Eli sat next to me in his too big blazer, bouncing his knee with nervous energy. When they called his name, he walked up to the stage, cleared his throat, and started to speak. I just want to say thank you to my teacher, Ms. Diaz, and my mom because she works nights so I can go to robotics club, and she always tells me that being smart is more important than being cool, and I think she's right. And I really love science and building things, and I'm so excited to go to the academy this summer. Vanessa's laughter cut through his words like a knife. She stood up from the family table in her emerald dress with her phone already recording and walked toward the stage with this practiced look of concern on her face. She reached up, took the microphone right out of Eli's hand, and spoke directly into the mic. "Oh, sweetie, come on. Let's be honest here. This is a pity scholarship. Everyone in this room knows it. A poor little boy whose dad ran off. It makes such a good headline, doesn't it? Let's not pretend this is about merit." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eli stood frozen on the stage, mouth half open, his note card slipping from his fingers and fluttering to the floor. His eyes found mine and filled with tears, and I saw every ounce of confidence drain out of him in real time. I started to stand, my chair scraping loudly across the floor, my vision tunneling with rage. That's when the glass doors slid open. Jordan walked in, and I'd never seen him look like that before. Calm, controlled, powerful. He was flanked by Noah carrying a laptop bag and a young woman from the law firm holding a folder. He stopped in the center aisle, scanned the room, took in Vanessa still holding the microphone and Eli standing small and shaking on the stage, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "My name is Jordan Hayes. I'm Eli's father, and I'd like a chance to respond before anyone else turned my son into a story." Every phone in the room lifted. Vanessa froze, her smile faltering for just a second. Jordan walked straight to the stage, knelt down in front of Eli, and quietly said, "You did nothing wrong up there, okay? I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner, but I'm here now." Eli nodded, tears streaming down his face, and I pulled him into my arms as Jordan stood and took the microphone from Vanessa's hand. Jordan faced the crowd, his voice steady and clear. "9 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I walked away from this woman and our son because I was scared and selfish. That's on me. But over the past year, Riley and I discovered something that I think all of you deserve to know. Vanessa Clark has been using a fake chronic illness to steal money, attention, and joy from a child who has done nothing but try to make her mother proud. And tonight, we're going to show you exactly how she did it." Noah connected the laptop to the projector, and the screen behind the stage lit up. A video appeared, time-stamped from earlier that afternoon, showing Noah connected the laptop to the projector, and the screen behind the stage lit up. A video appeared, time-stamped from earlier that afternoon, showing Jordan sitting in a hotel room. On screen, Jordan looked directly into the camera and said, "If you are watching this, it means Vanessa has just interrupted my son's scholarship celebration to make it about herself. She does this every time Eli achieves something because her entire online brand depends on being the victim, and she cannot let anyone else have a moment that does not serve her narrative." The video cut to a slideshow, screenshots of Vanessa's GoFundMe page showing over $40,000 raised for experimental treatments and medical bills. Then bank records showing charges on the same dates for a beach resort in Myrtle Beach, a designer handbag store, multiple visits to a cosmetic dermatologist, and a home renovation company. Hospital intake logs appeared next, showing Vanessa checking in for severe abdominal pain and being discharged within an hour with no significant findings, over and over, at least 15 times in 2 years. Gasps rippled through the room. I saw my mother cover her mouth with both hands. Mason stared at the screen, his face draining of color. Vanessa started speaking, her voice rising in pitch. "This is fake. This is edited. You cannot trust." Then the audio played. Vanessa's own voice, recorded on the message she accidentally sent me, filled the banquet hall through the sound system. Eli is my built-in charity prop, honestly. People love a sad kid with a sick aunt who is trying so hard. It is marketing, Mason. It is not evil. Chronic illness pays better than a 9 to 5 if you sell it right. You just have to give them a good enough story. The room exploded. People stood, shouted, pulled out their phones to record. The reporter in the back row was typing furiously. Vanessa turned to Mason, then to my mother, her hands shaking, her voice breaking. "That's out of context. That's not what I meant. You all know I'm sick. You've seen me suffer." Ellen couldn't even look at her. Mason pushed his chair back from the table, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. The tech company executive who had been sitting near the front stood up and walked straight to the exit without a word. Jordan handed the microphone to me. I walked to the center of the room, holding the mic in both hands to keep them from shaking. I looked at Vanessa first, standing there in her perfect dress with her perfect makeup starting to run, and I felt nothing but cold, clean clarity. I said, "You spent 8 years making sure my son felt like a mistake. You turned every celebration into your stage, every achievement into your tragedy. Tonight, you made sure 50 people and a dozen cameras heard you call him a pity case. I hope the attention was worth what it is about to cost you." I turned to Ellen and Charles, sitting frozen at their table. "You told me to keep quiet for the sake of the family. She made our pain public the day she turned my son into her backdrop. I'm just correcting the lighting." I pulled sealed folders from my bag and handed them to the school principal, the scholarship coordinator, and the reporter. Inside, you will find copies of everything you just saw, plus a fraud report filed with the crowdfunding platform this morning and a defamation lawsuit filed with my attorney this afternoon. We are seeking damages, a public retraction, and a restraining order. I looked at Mason, and for just a second, I felt sorry for him. I hope you learn the difference between loving someone and enabling them to hurt people. Then I held out my hand to Eli. "Baby, do you want to stay or go home?" Eli looked up at me, then at Jordan, and then back at me. His voice was barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly. "I want to go home." The three of us walked out together, Jordan's hand on Eli's shoulder, mine holding Eli's small, trembling fingers, past every staring face in that ballroom. Behind us, I heard Vanessa start screaming, real panic in her voice now, the sound of someone finally realizing the performance was over and no one was clapping anymore. 3 months later, the fallout was still unfolding. The video from the banquet went viral within 48 hours, shared across local news sites, parenting forums, and fraud watchdog pages. Vanessa's GoFundMe was suspended, investigated, and eventually shut down. The platform refunded donations and referred the case to the district attorney's office. Sponsors dropped her influencer friends distanced themselves. Local news ran a segment on charity fraud, and they used her face as the example. Mason filed for separation 2 weeks after the banquet, once he started digging through their finances and realized how deep her lies went. He moved into a small apartment across town and stopped answering our parents' calls. The family land that everyone fought over for years became part of the divorce settlement, frozen in legal limbo while both sides bled money on attorney fees. Ellen and Charles faced social embarrassment everywhere they went. People who had once admired them now whispering and pointing. Charles ended up in the hospital with a stress-induced health scare, high blood pressure and chest pains that kept him overnight for observation. Jordan and I went to family court for a preliminary hearing on custody and a visitation plan. Judge Malik Henderson, a no-nonsense man in his 50s, read through Carla Diaz's statement about Eli's anxiety and the pattern of harm he had witnessed. He listened to our attorney present the evidence, watched clips of the banquet video, and then looked directly at my parents and said, "This court is not in the business of judging your social media choices, Ms. Clark, but I am very interested in the impact your choices have had on this child." He ordered supervised visitation only between Eli and my parents, and he made it very clear that Vanessa was not to be present. Jordan rented a small apartment in Charlotte and rearranged his work travel so he could be in town at least 3 days a week. At first, I watched him carefully, waiting for him to disappear again, waiting for the guilt to wear off and the excuses to start. But he kept showing up. He learned Eli's schedule, attended his robotics club meetings, helped with homework at my kitchen table. Slowly, carefully, I started to trust that maybe he meant it this time. Several months after the banquet, life finally started to feel like something I could breathe inside.
Eli thrived at his summer tech academy, sending me excited texts about coding projects and robot builds and new friends who liked the same things he did. I got promoted at the distribution center to daytime operations coordinator, thanks in part to my supervisor writing a glowing reference that vouched for my reliability even through the chaos. The pay bump meant I could finally start saving again, maybe even think about finishing my degree. Jordan, Eli, and I started going to family therapy together, working through the years of absence and the complicated feelings that came with rebuilding. In one session, Eli talked about how he used to think his achievements made people upset, how he learned to make himself smaller so Aunt Vanessa wouldn't get sick. Hearing him say that out loud, in his small, careful voice, broke something in me all over again. But he also said he was learning that it was okay to be proud of himself, that maybe some people just weren't safe to share good things with, and that didn't mean the good things weren't real. Ellen reached out eventually, a long email full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. She said she didn't know, that she had been fooled too, that she was ashamed of how she treated me. I read the email twice, sitting alone in my living room after Eli went to bed, and then I archived it without responding. Maybe one day I'd be ready to talk to her, but that day was not today, and I was finally okay with that. One Saturday afternoon in late summer, Jordan and Eli were out on my small patio grilling hot dogs while I set the table inside. I heard Eli laugh, really laugh, the kind of sound I hadn't heard enough of in his life. He called out, "Hey, Dad, can you pass me the ketchup?" And Jordan said, "Sure, buddy," like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had to walk into the bathroom and cry for a few minutes, but this time it was relief, not grief. Have you ever had a family member turn your struggle into their stage? Use your pain to get attention they didn't earn? When did you realize that some people in your family were hurting you more than they were helping you? What was the moment that made you finally say, "I can't do this anymore"? I used to think keeping the family together meant letting them tear me apart. I thought being a good daughter, a good sister, meant swallowing every insult and showing up to every dinner no matter how small they made me feel. I thought if I just tried hard enough, loved them loudly enough, proved myself long enough, they would finally see me as worth protecting. I was wrong. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up when it's hard, who protect your kids when they're vulnerable, who celebrate your wins without needing to steal the spotlight. Family is the teacher who writes a statement for court, the coworker who lets you crash on their couch when you have nowhere to go, the private invest.
Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up when it's hard, who protect your kids when they're vulnerable, who celebrate your wins without needing to steal the spotlight. Family is the teacher who writes a statement for court, the coworker who lets you crash on their couch when you have nowhere to go, the private investigator who believes you when everyone else calls you paranoid, the man who walks back into the fire he ran from because he finally understands what it means to be a father. If you see yourself in this story, if you are the Riley in your family, if someone is using your child as a prop in their performance, please hear me. You are not too sensitive. You are not imagining it. You are not obligated to let anyone humiliate your child so they can play the hero or the victim or whatever role they've cast themselves in. You are allowed to document what is happening. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to walk away from people who refuse to see you, even if they raised you, even if walking away makes you the villain in their version of the story. There is a different kind of peace waiting on the other side of that door. I'm living proof. If you want more stories like this, where the black sheep finally gets to speak and the manipulators actually face consequences, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment and tell me your story, because I promise you, you are not alone in this. Thank you for staying with me to the end. I'll see you in the next one.